Victor Reinhardt was not just any pianist. He was a musical genius who had been playing the piano since he was 4 years old. Born in Vienna, a city full of music, history, and grand concert halls, Victor grew up surrounded by melodies and applause. His parents were both musicians. His father played the cello, and his mother taught violin. But even as a child, it was clear that Victor had something special. His tiny fingers would move across the keys like they were made for it. And by the time he was 10, he had already performed in front of a full audience at a national music event. People stood up to clap for him, and from that moment on, Victor believed he was born to be famous. As Victor grew older, his talent became even more powerful. He practiced for hours every day, mastering the most difficult pieces by Beethoven, Mozart, and Rachmaninoff. His performances were not just good, they were almost perfect. Every note he played seemed to come straight from his soul, and the audience loved him for it. He began to win competitions, travel to other countries, and appear on TV interviews. People started calling him the future of classical music. But with all the praise, Victor also became arrogant. He started thinking that he was better than everyone else. He no longer smiled at fellow musicians backstage, and he often criticized others in public. If someone made a mistake during a concert, Victor would smirk or roll his eyes. Slowly, he began to lose respect for the music itself and cared more about his fame and ego. He became famous not just for his talent, but also for his attitude. He spoke his mind without fear, and sometimes his words hurt others. In one interview, when a journalist asked if he was inspired by any female pianists, Victor laughed and replied, "There are no female pianists that inspire me. No woman could beat me on stage, not now, not ever." The room went silent for a moment. The journalist looked surprised, unsure if he was serious. But Victor didn't stop there. "They don't have the power, the speed, the intelligence. Piano is a man's game. It's just the truth," he said with a shrug. His comments caused a wave of anger online. His music lovers, teachers, students, and especially female pianists around the world were shocked. Social media exploded with people calling him rude, sexist, and disrespectful. Some fans unfollowed him. Others began sharing videos of brilliant female pianists who had won international awards. But Victor didn't care. He tweeted the next day, "Still waiting for a woman who can outplay me. Tag her if you find one." He thought he was being funny, but for many people, it was the last straw. Musicians from all backgrounds began speaking out against his arrogance. Some concert organizers even considered removing him from their guest lists. Despite the criticism, Victor continued to perform. His fans still filled concert halls, but people began watching not just for his music, but to see if someone would finally challenge him. Backstage, he still acted like a king. He refused to shake hands with opening performers, and sometimes gave last-minute changes to staff just to feel in control. During rehearsals, he demanded silence, and if someone made noise, he would stop playing and glare until the room was dead quiet. Some people began calling him the Ice King behind his back because of how cold and proud he acted, but Victor didn't notice, or maybe he didn't care. For him, the world was a stage where he was the star, and everyone else was just background. He believed that no one could truly stand on the same level as him. And when it came to female pianists, he had already made up his mind they were emotional, too soft, and lacked the sharp edge needed to dominate a grand piano. He had never played a duet with a woman, never collaborated with one, and never praised one. In his mind, the piano was a battlefield, and he was the undefeated warrior. One evening after another grand concert in Berlin, Victor sat for an interview with a well-known European music magazine. The interviewer, a calm and respected man named Thomas, asked Victor if he was worried about growing competition. Victor raised an eyebrow. "Competition? Who?"
Else.
"Some child who just learned Chopin last year." Thomas smiled politely and said, "There's a young woman from Poland, Emilia Kravacek. She plays beautifully and has recently gone viral for performing Rachmaninoff with her eyes closed." Victor scoffed. "Eyes closed? That's a trick, not talent. Anyone can pretend to be deep." Then, almost laughing, he added, "Let her play against me, and we'll see how fast she runs off stage." That interview went viral. The quote, "Let her play against me, and we'll see how fast she runs off stage," became both famous and infamous. Some fans cheered Victor on. Others thought he was being childish and disrespectful again. Amelia, sitting in her small home in Poland, watched the interview late at night on her phone. She said nothing, but her sister, who was sitting beside her, looked at her and said, "He thinks no one can defeat him. Maybe he hasn't met the right person yet." Meanwhile, Victor continued his tour. Every concert was more dramatic than the last. His team began to plan a special event in Paris International Invitational, where talented pianists from around the world would come together for a showcase. Victor agreed to perform as the closing act. "No one should follow me. I'll close the show," he told the organizers. They agreed, but secretly, they were thinking about adding something or someone that might surprise even Victor back in Poland. Amelia's students had seen the interview too. They knew how talented she was, how deeply she felt every note she played. One of her students said, "Miss, you should go to Paris. Show him what real music feels like." Amelia smiled gently. "I'm not interested in battles," she replied. But later that night, as she sat at the piano, she placed her fingers on the keys and began to play with such emotion that her younger sister, standing by the door, started crying. "You should go," her sister whispered, "not to fight. Remind the world what real music sounds like." Unaware of the storm building quietly in Poland, Victor continued his usual life. He practiced, performed, gave sharp interviews, and ignored the critics. In his world, he was still the king. But something was coming, something he would never expect. And it all began with one arrogant sentence: "No woman could ever beat me on the piano." What Victor didn't know was that far away, in a quiet room, a blind woman was getting ready, not with anger, not with pride, but with quiet strength, steady fingers, and a deep love for music that no ego could ever match. The world had praised Victor for years, but it was about to witness something far greater, something beyond sight, sound, or fame. A reminder that true greatness doesn't need to shout. It simply plays and lets the world listen. Amelia Krawczyk lived in a small town in Poland, far from the noise and pride of the big concert halls of Europe. Her world was calm, quiet, and full of music. She was blind since birth, but her other senses were strong. She couldn't see the keys on the piano, but she could feel every sound, every vibration, every emotion a note carried. For Amelia, music was not something you read with your eyes, it was something you lived with your heart. Her house was simple. There was a garden with wildflowers, and inside the air always smelled like fresh tea and old books. In the center of the living room stood her most important possession, a grand piano. It's dark brown and shiny, which her father had gifted her when she was 15. Her fingers had danced on those keys every day for years. She taught children from the neighborhood, many of whom had never touched a piano before. Amelia's lessons were different. She didn't just teach how to play, she taught how to feel. Her students often left the room smiling, some even crying. One evening, Amelia was sitting with her younger sister Marta. They were sipping hot chocolate and listening to the radio when they heard a voice they both recognized. It was Victor Reinhardt. His name had become well known in the world of classical music. He was being interviewed on a popular European program. The interviewer asked Victor about rising musicians and if he felt any young talent was catching up to him. Victor laughed a cold, sharp laugh. "There's no one," he said, "especially not a woman. They're not built for the piano. The strength, the sharpness, the energy, it's all in men. I've never seen a woman who could compete with me." Marta turned off the radio in anger. "Who does he think he is?" she said, her voice rising. "He's not a king. Dare he talk about women like that?" Amelia stayed quiet for a while. She looked thoughtful. Then she said in her soft voice, "He plays with speed. I play with silence. Maybe one day he'll hear it." Marta's eyes lit up. "Should show him. There's a piano invitational in Paris next month. Big names will be there, including him. You can apply. You can perform." Amelia shook her head gently. "I don't like crowds. I don't like flashing cameras or noisy halls." But her mind didn't stop thinking about it. That night, while she lay in bed, Her fingers moved on her blanket, like she was playing the piano in her dreams. She remembered all the times people had underestimated her. She remembered how she used to cry as a child when others said, "You can't do this, you're blind." But she had proved them wrong. And now Victor's words, so loud and full of ego, were stuck in her mind. Over the next few days, Amelia's students kept bringing it up. One of them, a little girl named Zozia, held Amelia's hand tightly and said, "Miss Amelia, I want the world to hear you like I do." That small voice touched something deep inside her. Amelia finally made a quiet decision. "I'll apply," she told Marta, "but only if I can play my way." Marta was surprised. "What do you mean your way?" Amelia replied, blindfolded. "So they know I don't need sight to feel the music. So they understand that playing comes from the soul, not from the eyes." They recorded a video of Amelia performing Chopin's Nocturne. She sat at the piano, blindfolded, her fingers moving with grace and power. The emotion was deep. The sound was pure. Even Marta, who had heard her sister play thousands of times, had tears running down her face by the end. They sent the video to the Paris Invitational Committee with a short message. "I do not see the keys. I hear them. I feel them. Let me play." Weeks passed. Amelia returned to her quiet routine, not thinking too much about the application. Then, one afternoon, Marta received an email. She opened it slowly, her hands shaking. Her eyes widened and she ran to her sister. "You've been selected," she shouted. Amelia smiled softly. "Then it's time to let the music speak." The news spread quickly through their town. Mayor came to visit. Amelia's old music teacher sent her flowers. Students hugged her, proud and excited. Marta helped Amelia prepare. They packed her favorite dress, her sheet music in Braille, and her special blindfold, a soft black silk ribbon. Her mother had once sewn for her to block light while sleeping. When they arrived in Paris, everything felt fast and big. Cars, people, lights. It was all a world far from Amelia's slow, peaceful life. But she stayed calm. Her focus was the piano, not the fame. At the event hotel, other performers looked at her curiously. Some whispered, "That's the blind one." Others ignored her completely. Only one young man from Italy greeted her kindly and said, "I watched your video. It moved me." Amelia thanked him, but she didn't talk much. She was saving all her energy for the performance. Meanwhile, Victor had just arrived in Paris. 2 reporters followed him, flashing cameras asking about his upcoming show. One reporter asked, "Do you know there's a blind woman performing at the same event?" Victor laughed again. "Let me guess, she's the one who wants to play blindfolded. That's a circus trick, not a concert." He waved his hand and walked away, his coat swinging behind him. Didn't bother to learn Amelia's name. The day before the performance, there was a rehearsal at the concert hall. The hall was massive, with golden walls, red velvet chairs, and chandeliers hanging from the ceiling. Each pianist had 20 minutes to test the piano and feel the space. Amelia waited quietly for her turn. When it came, she sat on the bench, tied her blindfold, and placed her fingers on the keys. She didn't play loud or fast. She played a gentle melody like a lullaby. The staff stopped what they were doing and listened. The room felt different, softer, warmer. When she finished, the sound hung in the air like a feather slowly falling. No one clapped. They were too moved to react. After she left the stage, one of the judges whispered to another, "She doesn't need sight. She already sees more than the rest." But Victor, watching from behind the curtain, smirked. "People fall for anything emotional," he said. "Let's see if she can handle pressure tomorrow." That night, Amelia sat by her window in the hotel room. Marta asked her, "Are you scared?" Amelia smiled. "Oh, I'm ready. I'm not here to defeat anyone. I'm here to let people feel something real. If even one person in the audience remembers what I played, that's enough for me." Marta hugged her tightly. "I think they'll remember you forever." Amelia fell asleep with peace in her heart, not worried about the next day. Victor, in his hotel suite, stayed up late practicing fast pieces, thinking of how to shine. But the truth was, he had never played from his heart, only from pride. Amelia was the opposite, and the stage in Paris was about to witness the difference between skill and soul. The challenge had been made not with words, but with music. And though Victor didn't know it yet, the real competition wasn't about being loud, fast, or powerful. It was about who could make the world feel something unforgettable. The music event in Paris was one of the most awaited piano showcases in the world. Every year, only a handful of brilliant pianists from different countries were invited. The audience was made up of musicians, critics, composers, students, and music lovers who had traveled from far and wide just to witness magic on the keys. This year, there was even more excitement in the air because of one named Victor Reinhardt. He had promised to deliver a performance that would remind the world why he was the king of piano. His fans were excited, his haters were curious, and everyone else was simply waiting to see what would happen, what most of them didn't expect. There was a blind woman from a small Polish town to quietly walk into the hall with her sister. Emilia Kravchuk wasn't a celebrity. She didn't wear designer clothes. She didn't have a large team or cameras following her. She arrived in a plain black coat, holding her white cane and guided by Marta. Yet something about her presence felt calm and special. People looked at her, whispered, and pointed. Some had seen her viral video. Others had only heard rumors. She plays Blindfolded, they said, and she might be the one going against Victor. Emilia didn't speak much. She held her head high, her hands steady, her heart quiet. She was not there to win a fight. She was there to play. Victor, on the other hand, entered with the confidence of a celebrity. He wore a sharp gray suit, sunglasses, and had 2 assistants by his side. As soon as he stepped into the venue, cameras began flashing. Fans asked for autographs. Journalists shouted questions. Victor answered with his usual charm and sarcasm. When someone asked, "Are you nervous about your competition?" he laughed loudly and said, "Only nervous that people will forget everyone else once I play." He knew about Emilia, but he still hadn't learned her name. To him, she was just the blind woman. Yeah, that's what he called her when speaking. To his team, "Make sure I go after the blind woman," he said. "Let her perform first. The contrast will make me look better." Meanwhile, the organizers were finalizing the performance schedule. Each performer had 20 minutes to show their skills. Emilia was given a time before Victor. When her name appeared on the screen backstage, some of the musicians raised their eyebrows. One of them, a young pianist from France, said to another, "Is this some kind of joke? It's a blind girl playing Blindfolded before Victor? That's insane." But another whispered, "I saw her video. Don't laugh too soon." Victor practiced alone in his dressing room, sat at the piano with fast fingers, playing Liszt and Rachmaninoff at a speed that impressed even his assistant. "They'll lose their minds," he said with a grin. "Especially after whatever ... emotional stuff she does." He didn't understand what made people cry when she played. He thought it was a trick away to win pity. But what Victor didn't know was that the crowd was already curious about Emilia. Not because she was blind, but because of how her music had made them feel in through a video screen. And tonight, they would hear her live. Backstage, Emilia sat calmly. Marta adjusted the black blindfold in her lap, the one Emilia would tie over her eyes just before playing. A judge came by to greet her and asked gently, "Are you ready?" Emilia smiled. "Yes, I've been ready for years." The atmosphere inside the hall grew electric. Lights dimmed. The host walked to the stage and announced, "Please welcome Emilia Kravchuk from Poland." There was polite applause, quiet, unsure. People didn't know what to expect. Then Emilia walked onto the stage slowly, guided by a helper. She wore a simple navy blue dress and flat shoes. She looked at peace. She sat on the piano bench, tied the blindfold over her eyes, and took a deep breath. The room went silent. Her hands touched the keys, and then dash music. It was not fast, not loud. It was soft, deep, like the sound of someone telling you a story without words. She played Chopin, but in a way that felt brand new. Each note was full of feeling, like she was crying, laughing, remembering, and dreaming, all at the same time. Some in the audience closed their eyes just to feel it better. Others watched in amazement, not believing that someone without sight could play with such grace and understanding. By the time she finished, there was silence. No one clapped right away. The silence lasted longer than usual, because people needed time to come back from wherever her music had taken them. And then, suddenly, the applause came. Loud, strong, long. People stood up. Some were crying. One judge wiped his eyes behind his glasses. Backstage, Victor was watching on the screen. He frowned. He wasn't expecting that. He still believed. It was overhyped, but the reaction of the crowd was real. Even he could tell. Amelia walked off stage, still blindfolded. Marta hugged her tightly.
You did it,
she whispered. No matter what happens now, you showed them something unforgettable. Then came Victor's turn. The host announced his name, and the crowd erupted in cheers. He stepped onto the stage with pride, adjusted his coat, and sat at the piano. Didn't smile, he didn't bow, just started playing fast, loud, and perfectly. His fingers flew like fire across the keys. He performed pieces that were technically challenging and showy. The audience watched with open mouths, amazed by his speed and strength. But something was missing. The music was powerful, but not personal. There was no story, no warmth, no soul. After he finished, people clapped loudly. Of course they did. He was brilliant, after all. But the applause didn't feel the same. It was respectful, impressed, but not emotional. Backstage, Amelia listened. She didn't compare. She didn't judge. She simply nodded. She said quietly. Marta smiled. But speed isn't everything. After the performances, the judges went to a private room to decide. The audience waited. Whispers filled the air. Some said, Victor will win. Others said, that woman. She touched something in me. Even Victor, back in his room, began to feel unsure. His hands, which had always felt like weapons on the piano, now felt heavy. He had seen something in Amelia's performance that he didn't understand. For the first time in years, he was quiet. The tension was high. In a short while, the results would be announced, and Victor was about to learn that the world was changing, not for tricks or pity, but for something deeper. Something only music from the heart could give. The big night had arrived. The Grand Music Hall in Paris was filled with people, musicians, critics, students, teachers, and fans. The red seats were full, the golden lights were bright, and the air was filled with excitement. A concert anymore. It had become something more, a moment people would remember. Everyone had come to see the world's most famous pianist, Victor Reinhardt, but now there was someone else everyone was curious about, Amelia Kravacek. The blind woman who played with a blindfold and made the room feel something they had never felt before. Behind the curtains, Amelia sat quietly with her sister Marta beside her. Her hands rested in her lap, calm and still. Marta whispered, "Are you nervous?" Amelia smiled and shook her head. Not nervous, just ready. She had prepared for this moment her whole life, not to beat someone, but to finally share her music with people who were truly listening, not just hearing fast notes or clever tricks, but feeling the soul inside every sound. When the announcer called her name, a quiet hush fell over the audience. Amelia stood slowly and walked to the stage with the help of a kind staff member. She wore a simple blue dress, soft shoes, and carried no ego. Gosh. Energy, just herself, her gift, and a long black ribbon folded in her hand. The crowd watched silently as she sat at the grand piano. She tied the blindfold gently over her eyes. Though everyone knew she was blind, the act of covering her eyes held deep meaning. She was telling the world, "I don't need to see to show you beauty. I don't need to impress you with my eyes. I will move your heart with my hands." She took a deep breath, then her fingers began to play. At first the sound was soft, barely more than a whisper. First few notes floated like feathers in the air. Then came the rise, slow and steady, each note like a step in a dream. She wasn't just playing music. She was telling a story without words, a story of darkness and light, of pain and peace, falling and rising again. Every note carried emotion, pure, deep emotion. Some sounded like laughter, others like tears. The room grew quieter and quieter until all that could be heard was the sound of the piano and the hearts beating in the room. People sat motionless. Some leaned forward without even realizing it. Some closed their eyes. Some, without knowing why, began to cry. She didn't play with speed. She didn't play to show off. She played to connect. Even the judges, who had seen hundreds of performers in their careers, looked at each other, their eyes full of wonder. One of them whispered, This is not just performance. This is something higher." Somewhere in the back row, a child asked his mother, "Is this magic?" The mother didn't answer. Her throat was tight, her eyes filled with tears. Amelia played for almost 20 minutes, and when she reached the final note, she held it gently, letting it fade slowly, like a soft goodbye. Then silence. No one moved, no one clapped right away. It was as if time had paused for a moment, and then, all at once, the crowd stood. The entire hall filled with loud applause, cheers, whistles, and standing ovations. People were wiping their eyes. Some hugged each other. Some clapped with both hands and their whole hearts. "Backstage," Marta cried, as she watched her sister walk slowly off the stage. One of the staff whispered to her, "I've worked here for 20 years. I've never seen anything like that." Amelia walked behind the curtain. Victor stood watching. For the first time, his usual smirk was gone. His arms were crossed tightly, and his eyes were fixed on the stage where the applause still continued. He had heard her music, and even though he didn't want to admit it, something in him had changed. He had practiced fast pieces, loud ones, full of fire and force. He thought that was what people wanted: speed, power, brilliance. But now he wasn't sure anymore. Still, he walked to the stage when they called his name. The crowd welcomed him with loud cheers. He was famous, after all, sat confidently at the piano, adjusted his suit, and placed his fingers on the keys. Then he began. He played fast. His fingers moved like lightning. The music was strong, sharp, and technical. He jumped from one complicated section to another without a single mistake. But something felt different this time. The crowd was listening, but not in the same way. They watched with open eyes but closed hearts. He finished his piece with a powerful crash of chords and lifted his hands from the keys like a magician ending a trick. The applause came quickly, but not deeply. It was loud, but it wasn't emotional. People clapped out of respect, but not from the heart. There was no one crying, no one standing. Just polite clapping for a man who had done something impressive but not unforgettable. Victor looked into the crowd, his smile slowly fading. He could feel it. He knew. He had played perfectly, but Amelia had touched something that he never could. Backstage, he walked past Marta and Amelia. He paused for a moment, his face unreadable. Then, without looking at them, he whispered, "She plays differently." Marta looked at him and said softly, "She doesn't play to win. She plays to heal." The judges left the stage to make their final decision. It was going to be close, but also not close at all. One of the senior judges, a man who had been teaching music for over 40 years, stood up and said, "We are not judging fingers. We are judging the soul of music." And I think we all know who reminded us of that tonight. While the judges discussed behind closed doors, the audience continued to whisper about Amelia. Her name was now on everyone's lips. A group of young musicians from Japan were already searching for her online. A famous composer in the audience had tears in his eyes and whispered to his friend, "She's what music is meant to be." Outside the venue, people were calling friends, texting family, and posting about the performance. "I just witnessed something unforgettable," one person wrote. Another tweeted, "A blind pianist just made us see music in a new way." Inside, Amelia sat quietly, holding Marta's hand. She wasn't thinking about the prize. She wasn't thinking about Victor. She was simply thankful. Thankful for the chance to share her voice. A voice that didn't come from her mouth, but from her fingers. A voice that needed no words. When the judges returned, the hall fell silent again. Announcer walked to the center of the stage and said, "This evening has shown us not only skill, but also soul. We saw two amazing performances, one of great power and one of deep feeling. But tonight, we have chosen to award the prize to someone whose music reminded us what it means to feel. Please welcome our winner, Amelia Kravchuk." The crowd rose. Again, cheers filled the air. People clapped with joy, some with tears, some with wide smiles. Marta jumped up and hugged her sister tightly. Amelia stood slowly, still blindfolded, still calm. She walked to the stage where a small golden trophy waited. A judge handed it to her gently and said, "Thank you for making us remember why we love music." Amelia held the trophy with both hands. She removed her blindfold, not to see but as a sign that the world had seen her heart, even if her eyes had never seen the world. Victor stood in the shadows. He didn't clap at first, he just watched. His face was serious, not angry but thoughtful. After a long moment, he finally brought his hands together and began to clap slowly, softly, sincerely. The moment belonged to Amelia. She had done what no one expected. She didn't beat Victor with pride. She didn't fight him with fire. She melted hearts with music. And in doing so, she won not just the prize, but the love of everyone in that room. That night, people didn't just leave. With memories of a concert, they left changed. They had heard something that would stay with them forever. And Amelia, she didn't ask for fame. She didn't want headlines. She simply said thank you and returned to the quiet part of the world where she came from with her heart full, her soul at peace, and her music forever echoing in the minds of those lucky enough to hear it. The night after the concert, the city of Paris felt different. The lights still sparkled, the cars still passed through the busy streets, and music still floated out of cafes. But something in the air had changed for those who had sat in that grand concert hall. What they had witnessed was more than just music. It was more than a performance. It was a feeling that had touched hearts and reminded people why they loved art in the first place. Amelia Kravchuk, the blind pianist from Poland, had left a mark that would not fade. Backstage, after the announcement of her win, the organizers offered Amelia flowers, interviews, and photographs. Reporters crowded the hallway, all wanting her attention. But Amelia, still in her calm way, only accepted what she felt was right. She posed for a few pictures with her sister Marta and the trophy, gave a short thank you speech, and politely refused most interviews. "I came to play," she said softly, "not to become a star." She just wanted to go back to her piano, her students, her quiet home where music lived without competition, still. Her story had already taken flight. Videos of her performance began spreading across the internet. Within hours, clips were seen by millions. People from different countries, who didn't even speak the same language, wrote comments like "I cried listening to her, and this is the soul of music." Famous musicians shared her video saying they were deeply moved. Blind students. An artist wrote to her saying she had inspired them to never give up. Amelia didn't see any of this, of course, but Marta read her the comments, and each time she did, Amelia smiled and said, "I'm happy they could feel what I felt." But there was someone else who couldn't stop thinking about that night, Victor. Reinhardt. For years, Victor had lived like a king in the world of classical piano. People praised him, feared him, followed him. But that night, he realized something he had never truly understood before. Perfection isn't everything. He had always believed that playing fast and flawless made him the best. But when he heard Amelia play Blindfolded, without pride, without showing off, and with such deep feeling, it shook something inside him. After the concert, Victor didn't go to the celebration dinner. He stayed in his hotel room staring at the piano in the corner. For the first time in years, he didn't touch the keys. He just sat there thinking. He remembered every note Amelia had played, the way her fingers moved gently, the silence between the sounds, and how the entire audience sat still, frozen, touched. He asked himself questions he never had before. What am I playing for? Why don't people feel anything when I perform anymore? Have I forgotten what music really means? The next day, Victor left Paris quietly, without the press, without attention. He needed time to think, to understand. To change, he traveled alone for a while, first to Italy, then to Austria, then to a small town in Switzerland where no one knew his name. He started playing again, but this time not for concerts, not for fame, but just for himself. In a quiet cabin, with an old piano and a notebook, Victor began to rediscover music, the way he had loved it as a child. Meanwhile, Amelia returned to Poland with Marta. The town welcomed her like a hero. Her students brought flowers. The mayor held a small ceremony in her honor. But Amelia didn't let the attention change her. She continued teaching, sitting beside each student, listening to their music with patience, encouraging them not to copy others, but to find their own voice. One afternoon, a letter arrived at her house. Marta opened it and read it aloud. Dear Amelia, I want to thank you. I have played on the world's biggest stages, and I thought I had seen and done it all. But the night I heard you perform, something changed in me. You reminded me that music is not a race. It is not a battle. It is a language of the heart. It made me feel things I had forgotten. I am learning again now, slowly. I hope one day we can meet not as rivals, but as musicians who share the same. Love, Victor Reinhardt. Amelia said nothing for a long moment. Then she simply nodded and said, He's finally listening. Months passed. Amelia's fame continued to grow, though she never chased it. She received invitations to perform around the world from New York to Tokyo, but she only accepted a few. She preferred to stay home, close to her students, close to peace. Her music was now used in films, healing centers, and even therapy sessions for children. People said listening to her play felt like someone holding your heart with care. One day, a music school in Vienna invited her to perform at a charity concert. The event would raise funds to provide instruments to blind children across Europe. Amelia agreed. When she arrived, she discovered something unexpected. Victor Reinhardt was also performing that night. The organizers asked if they would be willing to do a duet. There was a quiet moment between the two. Then Victor smiled, not his usual proud smile, but a softer, humble one. Shall we? He asked. Amelia extended her hand, and he took it gently. That night, they sat side by side at the piano, one man who had once played only to win, and one woman who had always played to feel. Together, they played a piece written by Victor himself, his first composition since his journey of change. It was slow, thoughtful, emotional, and when Amelia joined in, their notes danced together like the wind and water, so different, yet moving in harmony. The audience watched in awe. Many remembered the story. They remembered the arrogant words Victor had once spoken. No woman could beat me. And now they saw a man who had been beaten not by force, not by pride, but by music, by truth, by emotion. At the end of their duet, the hall filled with applause. Not wild cheers, but warm, grateful, clapping, the kind that came from the heart. Victor stood and bowed. Then he stepped back and let Amelia take the center. She didn't know where to face, but she smiled quietly, knowing the love in the room. Victor leaned in and whispered, They see you now. Even the blind can see your heart. That night, a journalist wrote an article titled, The Day the Piano Taught Us All. He ended it with these words, It wasn't a contest. It never was. It was a lesson. A proud man learned humility. A quiet woman gave the world a gift. And music, as always, was the teacher. From that day on, Victor and Amelia stayed in touch. They didn't become best friends, but they respected each other deeply. They played together once a year, never for money, never for awards, just for people who needed healing through music. And wherever Amelia played, the audience always sat a little straighter, listened a little closer, and left a little lighter. Because once you hear truth in music, you can never forget it. In the end, Victor was right about one thing: no one could beat him. But Amelia never came to beat anyone. She came to show the world something more powerful than victory. She came to remind us that the greatest music is not played to prove something. It is played to make people feel alive.